I've made a conscious choice not to talk about a story for a while now. And that story is Bill Belichick to the Commanders, because I think it's silly and there's a lot of noise. And I think often Washington winds up in these rumors because it seems like Washington and the organization is an easy target. And there's just a lot of stuff that flies around. But the noise is getting louder. The noise is getting to a point where I think it's at the very least worth addressing, and certainly listening to what the noise is. When someone like an Albert Breer, who's a real NFL reporter with real NFL sources, starts talking about something like this, I think you have to listen. And luckily for us, and here in the Odyssey family of stations, Breer, I think, and Grant have known each other a long time. So Breer hopped on Grant and Danny in the 3 o'clock hour today and explained more about what he's hearing. Now, he had also mentioned some of this on the Dan Patrick Show and other places. I think it's worth mentioning that Breer has written in SI, in the Monday Morning Quarterback, that like when he did his here's the top list of people, Belichick wasn't on it. But it does seem like there is at least some embers, or there are at least some embers to where the smoke is. And obviously we will find out sooner rather than later, relatively speaking, in the next 2 months, whether or not there's any fire. But here's what Breer said today on Grant and Danny in terms of what he's hearing relative to Belichick and the Commanders.
I don't know like to what level it's advanced, but it's certainly been talked about, something that I think the one thing that I've had a hard time ascertaining is like exactly what context in which the Commanders would bring Belichick in if that were to happen. Would it be as like sort of a football czar? Would it be as a head coach? Would it be as both? You know, that part I'm not as sure about, but it does seem like there would be some interest there. I would say like it does make sense for a couple of different reasons. Number one, you know, Belichick's from there originally. He grew up in Annapolis, which you guys know how close that is to you more than I do. I think it's 45 minutes, right? Something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, the second piece of it is I think for Josh Harris here, if you look at the history of these sorts of things, and when we've seen, you know, guys who are older, who are established come in, it's almost always been a credibility play for the owner, right? So I think, you know, for a new owner, bringing in somebody like Belichick would certainly give you credibility, you know, and being able to land somebody like that would give you credibility. You know, and then I think the third part of it would be just kind of where the Commanders are. And if they decide that we are only a few steps away, and they do make the decision, which, to be clear, has not been made, to move away from the three guys who've been in charge, and Ron Rivera, Martin Mayhew, and Marty Herney, if they do make that decision to move away from that brass, but decide we still have a roster that's relatively close and we can go out and spend some money and build around Sam Howell, well, you know, then like how would you, you know, immediately give that team, that group some juice and, you know, say we're going to get the most out of this particular group in the here and now. It makes sense to make a hire for right now, and Belichick would be that. So I think there are several reasons why it makes sense. You know, there's also Bill's history in the NFC East and his affinity for, you know, franchises and cities that have history, and certainly you guys have that down there. You know, it's an interesting idea, and I don't know if it's gotten much past the idea stage, but again, it's something that's been rumored for a while.
So I can't believe I'm about to say this, because Bill Belichick has more rings than any coach in the history of the sport. He's got, 8 as a head coach. He won a couple more as defensive coordinator for Bill Parcells. He's been a part of endless amounts of winning. I mean, even in Cleveland the first time around when the team moved, like they were starting to trend things the right direction there. And if you watch some of the old documentaries or 30 for 30s or whatever on that Browns team, then you know, like they were on to something with that staff, and Saban's there and everybody's there, and it kind of gets pulled out from underneath them. That said, without Tom Brady, Bill Belichick's resume is really not that impressive. Like you can point directionally at all the things you want and what might have happened in Cleveland, but what did happen is they went another direction, and the team moved, and Belichick wasn't retained, and he gets to New England, and before Brady, they're kind of in the middle of the road. After Brady, they've been mostly terrible. And a big reason why, obviously not just Brady's performance as perhaps the greatest quarterback ever, but a big reason why they're able to build the teams the way they built them is Tom took pay cuts for almost his entire career. Like, they had an unfair advantage due to the fact that for the time that he was their quarterback didn't care about money because he was married to a billionaire supermodel. And so, one, he was making a ton of money and he was fine with it. Two, his wife had more money anyway, and now he's a billionaire. Even though they're divorced, like, he's a billionaire now. It's worked out just fine for Brady. All in all, like, to try to say that Belichick can bring what he did in New England here would be a misread of the situation, in my opinion, to the point that this is the thing I'm going to say that I can't believe I'm about to say. If I think Belichick should be more interested in Washington than Washington should be interested in Belichick. And I kind of hate myself for saying that. Because who am I, if I'm the Commanders, to turn up my nose at the greatest coach of all time? Who am I to, we got a new owner, or we don't need Bill Belichick now? And as a radio host, it feels insanely hot takey to say that. But the reality is, Belichick is a 71-year-old defensive head coach in an offensive league. And while he schematically and from a football like X's and O's standpoint is still tremendous, his eye for talent has been questionable throughout the championships. There's a plenty of picks and decisions made where you're like, what were you thinking there, man? And so if he inherits a quarterback, that seems better than him having to go find one, see Jones, Mac, because he didn't have to do it for 20 years. Although he did really like Garoppolo, and it seems like Garoppolo's a serviceable NFL quarterback. Obviously, the injuries have derailed his career in a major way, but that was kind of Belichick's other big like fish on a hook. But like, I love me some KOC, but he drafted KOC in like the 3rd round. And now Kevin's still at an age where he could be playing, and he's been a head coach for a couple years. So I just think that if I'm Belichick, Washington's got a bunch of defensive talent, theoretically, that's being underutilized and underused. They've got a young quarterback that's super duper intriguing. I love the franchise from a history standpoint. I love the area. I get to go home to the team that I probably watched the most growing up. I get to return to the NFC East after my years with the Giants. I'm super intrigued by it. But if I'm Washington, I want Ben Johnson. I want Bobby Slowick. I want one of these young offensive coaches that hopefully is Sam Howell's partner in crime, the Belichick to my Brady. And not that Sam Howell's going to be Brady. Let's slow down on that. But think of the great partnerships over the years of coaches and OCs, or quarterbacks and offensive coordinators or head coaches that are on the offensive side. And like, that's what you want. I mean, Brady, for his greatness, certainly was at a different level when he had Josh McDaniels there. That was his guy. They worked extremely well together. Obviously, Bill O'Brien and Brady had a fair amount of success. And Bill O'Brien, if he would be coming to be the OC here, like, you can do a lot worse than Bill O'Brien. I know the Patriots offense isn't very good right now, but a lot of that is due to Mac Jones' ineptitude and the lack of skill position talent that they have at the wide receiver position. You give Bill O'Brien these guys, and like, he'd probably be pretty good. And like, philosophically, I like a lot of what Belichick stands for: being balanced, being able to do a bunch of stuff on defense. And so I'm not going to say like they should 100% not be interested. That would be dumb. He still is Bill Belichick, even if this year is a disaster in New England. He didn't forget football. We say, Bill Belichick's forgotten more football than I'll ever know. He didn't forget everything. But at the same time, like, I just think that at this stage in the operation for Washington and trying to build something that is long-term sustainable, and at this stage of Belichick's career, Washington can do, as silly as it sounds, better than Bill Belichick. That said, there are some things that Breer brings up there that I think are super interesting, and there's also a couple other things he said that I want to play for you next. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live on the free Odyssey app, and we are streaming live on YouTube. I think it was interesting listening to Albert Breer, who was on with Grant and Danny, talking about the validity that apparently it gives. Like when Shad Khan was in Jacksonville, right? There's this outsider. He buys the team. He's never been around pro sports, certainly not the NFL. I don't think he might have had I know he now has a stake in a soccer club, and he might have had that first, so I don't want to speak out of turn on Shad Khan. But for sure, he had never been around the NFL. And it was his first foray into American pro sports. And so he was like, oh, I know how I can get credibility. Let me go hire Tom Coughlin. And it was a totally, I wouldn't say it was not a new franchise, but like the Jags were still relatively new, like in their first 20 years. Coughlin, obviously had history there. There's a lot of reasons why, and Coughlin was coming off of a relatively successful run with the Giants, obviously very successful, but he was a couple years removed from that success. Point being that there was a reason why he felt like he wanted to go get an older coach. You had a new owner when Robert Kraft got to New England, and he's like, let me go hire Bill Parcells. And obviously that had some level. I think that was the timeline or the right one. Someone hired Parcells. Anthony, do you remember who Breer said hired Parcells? Was it when Kraft got to New England? Where did
that I don't know off the top of my head.
Someone hired Parcells at some point to become the guy. It was Ross in Miami. Hired him as the team president. That's what it was. Stephen Ross hired him to be the guy. But like Belichick and Parcells were some of the early hires, and it was weird how it like all went down in New England. But like that was part of the deal in New England. I think was Belichick that Parcells or that Kraft hired when he bought the team. So like this is not new in terms of concept of like new owner comes in, wants to hire someone who's got a great name and is very, very established. Here's why I think Josh Harris doesn't need to do that. I think Josh Harris has already proven that he belongs. One, he's an owner of many other American sports, or two other American sports teams that have been successful and turned their franchises around, even if they haven't won titles yet. But like the Sixers are in a way better spot than they were when he got there. And the Devils are in a better spot than when he got there. So that's thing one. Thing two, like Harris is not new to the NFL. Harris has been around the Steelers as a minority partner. And I think what he's done in Washington so far speaks for itself, the way he's been able to elevate the franchise just by his mere presence. So I don't think that you need to go and like prove anything to anyone by hiring Bill Belichick. In many ways that feels, and I hate to just echo this because I've seen like fans say this and I think it's a little bit simplistic, but it does feel like a bit of a Dan Snyder move. Where it's like, oh, let me go get the big name. Because I think it's deeper than that. I don't think it's about the name value of Belichick. I think it's about the credibility he brings. And I think it's about saying like, hey, Bill, can you come comb through our operation and tell us what we need to fix? And then in a couple of years, you're going to retire because you'll be 75 years old. And hopefully there's a replacement. But I think another like problem with that, and if I was advising Josh Harris, here, Josh, if you would like me to formally advise you, you could pay me for this instead of listening to my radio show for free. Just saying. I know you don't have as much money as you used to have because you bought a $6 billion. That's a big check. Lots of money. But I think you're still doing all right. Anyway, this is like very inside football, but like the Belichick coaching tree is terrible. And I think that's relevant here. So if you're like trying to set up long-term success and you want to get Sam in a system that has some longitudinal length to it, like, oh, this is something that could be the identity of our franchise for the next decade, I want someone in the Shanahan tree. Like, I want someone in that Shanahan, McVay, West Coast type of stem that seems to have staying power and is also so widespread that the evolutions within the NFL are continually sprouting new branches off of it. You know, D'Amico Ryans goes to Houston, and Bobby Slowick, who was with Kyle and D'Amico in San Francisco, is going to wind up probably being a head coach someday off the D'Amico Ryans tree. And then who knows who he's got underneath him. And obviously McDaniels and LaFleur and like all these guys have other assistants who have gone on to head coaching jobs, some more successful than others. But it is easier to have the length and do it without the top guy than every coach in the Belichick tree has pretty much been somewhere between bad and a disaster. O'Brien's the closest one to having had success with his stint in Houston. So if you're thinking about something with length and a system that can be set up of how to run an operation, I actually don't think Belichick's the smart guy there. I think his history proves that without him, and frankly, without Brady, it doesn't work. That said, what would it mean for Josh Harris to land Bill Belichick, and can he do it? Albert Breer with Grant and Danny about 90 minutes ago over on 106.7 The Fan.
Well, so that's what's fascinating about it, because at some point, you know, the Crafts are going to have to sit down with Bill and and handle this part of it. You know what I mean? Like, now I've advocated, I think they should do it now, because it does feel to me like I'll just say in this market, it's starting to feel like an inevitability that this is the end, right? And so if that's true, and I'm not saying one way or the other that Kraft has made that decision, but if he has, it'd make sense for him to sit down with Bill and say, how do you want to handle this? And try to give him some dignity on the way out. And he could say, you know, like, you'll walk away right now if you want, and we can install Gerard for the rest of the year. And you've earned that, right? Like, if you want to do that, you can do that. We can, you know, play this out to the end of the year, not say anything, and then announce it the day after the season. We can play this out the rest of the year, announce it with a week or two left, and then give the fans a chance to say goodbye to you and honor you in the last home game. Or we can do this the hard way. And I think the thing that you're talking about is what makes this difficult. It's, do the Crafts want compensation? And in particular, do they want compensation as a result of not getting any compensation for Brady? You know, like in saying we can't let both Brady and Belichick walk without getting any compensation. Well, you know, if they try to do that and have that be part of the deal, Bill's got the power to just say, no, you know, I want to coach next year, so just fire me. You can fire me, and then I'll take my money, and whatever team I'm going to will keep their draft picks, and that'll be that. So that compensation part of it, I think, is what makes wherever the eventual separation, however that happens, a little tricky.
So there you go. That's the compensation piece. And would the Commanders be willing to give up something? I would not. Rarely does that ever work. And especially when you are trying to build a team, like, you need players. There are good coaches out there. It's harder to get, I won't say it's harder to get a good coach than it is a good player. But that draft capital is very, very valuable. And if you're going to spend it, especially if it's going to be like a first, obviously if you want to trade a third, then okay, fine. Belichick theoretically can make a third rounder into a much better player, and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. So a coach is more valuable in that way. But a first rounder who could be the franchise changer, that seems, and obviously we all know that, you know, the most famous franchise changer for New England was a sixth rounder, but playing the odds, that higher draft compensation seems like a bad idea for a coach, especially when I think this is a place people are going to want to go. Like, you should have your pick. You're not limited to one guy. You can take the best on the market, and you should be, unlike previous years under previous ownership, in the mix for whoever you want. But let's go ahead and ask the question. 301-230-0980 is the phone number, the Ace Law listener line. Would you want Belichick to come to D.C.? 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.